This little stretch of water between Spain and Morocco is only 9 miles wide, but it's come to represent some kind of cultural chasm between Europe and Africa. But in the 8th century, when sea travel was the way to get around, that wasn't a barrier, it was a highway. In July 711, 7,000 Berber tribesmen stormed across the Straits of Gibraltar and invaded Europe. The Muslims then began an incredible process of expansion. In just 4 years, they'd colonised almost the whole of Spain, had crossed the Pyrenees, and were only halted at Poitiers in France. Were it not for this reverse, an army which had swept across 2 continents might easily have crossed the English Channel and occupied Britain. The Muslims called the country they came to Al-Andalus, the land of the Vandals. This refers to the Germanic tribe who ruled Spain at the time, the Visigoths. Spanish historians have traditionally seen the Muslim invasion of Spain as a terrible and violent attack, an assault on Christian Europe. In fact, here at the Visigothic site of Recopolis near Madrid, archaeologists have found evidence which offers a rather different explanation.
The city of Recopolis, in fact, was the royal city founded by the Visigoths in order to demonstrate the power of the new state. Dimensions were spectacular for this period. And this complex is the most important discovery in Western Europe.
What was it at the time that the Muslims were invading? What was the state of the city then?
They found it not only here in this part of Iberia, but in everywhere of the Al-Andalus. They founded cities in crisis. Social crisis, of urban crisis. The traditional explanation is this idea that when the Arabs came, the society collapses and the city collapses. It's not true. It's not true. The collapse of the city started during the Visigothic period.
If you read the Orthodox Spanish histories, then you'll learn that predatory Muslim hordes forcibly appropriated Visigothic Spain. And there certainly were some invasion battles. But at many places, like here at Recopolis, it seems that the newcomers were actually welcomed with open arms. We even have treaties where the Visigoths enthusiastically hand over their land in return for effective Muslim protection. When you were excavating, did you find any evidence of violence at the time of the Arab invasion?
We don't have evidence of violence. Not at all. In this area was peaceful, and the archaeology is showing another landscape, another explanation. So. The Muslims started to build a new society.
The enthusiasm for learning that the Islamic world had spent years nurturing was about to be transmitted to Europe.
We went into Spain not to fight against the people there, but to save them from the tyranny of the Latins and others that governed them at the time. In Al-Andalus, they found a paradise on earth. When the Arabs changed location, changed geography from their inhospitable, barren homeland, and moved to a rich and fertile country, this was to transform the Arab mind. This is the secret of how such a great civilization came to be born.
The foundations of a new society had been laid. A self-confident, progressive and sophisticated civilization had arrived among the failing states of Europe.
and the continent's history was about to be transformed. The Muslim invasion of Spain had been swift and effective, but it lacked a strong leadership. The first wave of invaders were North African tribesmen, only recently converted to Islam, and without connections to the power base of Arabia. But this was about to change. In the capital of the Muslim world, a political coup left all the members of the ruling dynasty massacred. All, that is, except for one, a prince called Abd al-Rahman.
Abd al-Rahman was in his late teens when his family was massacred. He managed to escape the slaughter and fled to the hills west of Damascus.
His mother had been from North Africa, and Abd al-Rahman must have grown up hearing tales of Al-Andalus. And so he made a dangerous journey across the Nile and the deserts of Egypt, heading for those distant lands. Abd al-Rahman brought culture and learning from the centre of the Islamic world straight to the heart of Al-Andalus.
When Abd al-Rahman arrived in Spain, he came here to Cordoba, where the city was in complete disarray. That Roman bridge had collapsed into the river. But Abd al-Rahman set to rebuilding the city. You have to remember that it's in this context that the Arabs arrive, not as marauding destroyers, but sometimes as saviours.
Abd al-Rahman brought cutting-edge technology for irrigation to Spain. Almost immediately, the landscape was transformed. Palm trees, lemon and orange groves, avocados, artichokes and pomegranates, none of which had been seen in Europe. Because of Abd al-Rahman's sophisticated trade network, this new agriculture created huge wealth. And these riches were used to build one of the greatest cities in the world. While the inhabitants of London were still living in wooden houses, the people of Cordoba had built a cosmopolitan city with a population of over 100,000, the largest settlement in Europe. Reports from European visitors to Cordoba describe a city with 70 libraries and over 300 public baths. The accounts tell of houses with running water and roads illuminated by streetlights.
You often have to take medieval sources with a fairly substantial pinch of salt because chroniclers were extremely fond of exaggeration. But in fact, the new excavations here at Cordoba are actually revealing a city that was just as rich as the one that they described. These monumental palace walls belong to a Muslim aristocrat, and this channel over here is part of the water system that brought Cordoba its famously effective sewage works, as well as the fountains and the baths that so impressed all those European visitors.
Cordoba was described by a 10th century German visitor as the ornament of the world.
One of the reasons it's been so difficult to investigate Islamic Cordoba is that the city's been built up on itself like a kind of layer cake. But here, the archaeologists have taken away the modern level to reveal that Islamic layer there, and then down at the bottom, a Roman mosaic.
Abd al-Rahman built Cordoba on top of what had been one of the largest cities in Roman Spain, outshining all that went before. And his greatest achievement was this: the Great Mosque of Cordoba. With a floor space the size of 4 football pitches, this is the largest mosque in Western Islam. The forest of 600 marble columns disappear into the distance, creating a mesmeric infinity effect. On the columns, arches balance on top of one another. Its shell-shaped prayer niche has an extraordinary acoustic, making any word spoken inside audible to the entire congregation.
When the mosque was first built, these archways would have been opened to allow people and light to stream in and out. And this courtyard was a central part of the complex. People would come here to ritually purify themselves before they worshipped, or just to gossip and do business.
Abd al-Rahman's original mosque was only a fraction of the size of the building that stands today. Over a period of 200 years, rulers would extend the mosque 3 times. It's been suggested that the mosque was enlarged because each new ruler of the city wanted to stamp his authority on the building. But there's also a more straightforward explanation. The Cordoba Mosque had to accommodate the burgeoning number of worshippers. The Muslim population of Spain was growing fast. Modern Spain has been reluctant to acknowledge that its indigenous population converted to Islam in droves.
The standard history books present the Muslim occupation of Spain as something that was superficial, just a surface colonisation by an Arab elite, not a presence that had any kind of lasting impact on the bulk of the population. New archaeological evidence is turning that idea on its head.
All over Spain, cities like Cordoba were established. Even Madrid was founded by Muslims. The original Arab walls still stand behind the royal palace.
How far did Muslim communities spread through Spain?
We see remains dating from the time of Al-Andalus almost everywhere, not only in the south of Spain, but also in other parts of Spain. There are emerging lots of sites, fortresses, villages, and cities, almost everywhere. People were Arabized, losing the form of Latin they were speaking into them, and they were Islamized in the sense that they dropped Christianity and converted to Islam in massive numbers, really.
Were these forced conversions, or was the idea of Islam particularly attractive?
It's always very difficult to say why someone converts to another religion, isn't it? But I think there's no evidence of any forced conversion at all. In a way, the Islamization and Arabization of territories like Al-Andalus is very similar to what happened to the Roman Empire, when people wanted to convert to the values and to the cultural values, to the religious values, and to the way of living of what seemed to be a civilization which had lots of advantages.
I think it's very easy to forget that at this moment in time, Islam is a culture of innovation, isn't it? As you said, it's drawing in ideas from the East.
It's a culture of phenomenal innovation. The opportunities of living because of the market, because of the trade relations and so on, which were much more interesting.
The Islamization of Spain did more than change the name of the god that people worshipped. People converted because this was a religion which had something to offer them. It had wealth, it had social structure, and it had intellectual power.
The Arabs brought in one innovation that did more than any other to change the cultural makeup of Europe. And it's this: paper. The idea almost certainly came from the Chinese via trade exchange, and it is revolutionary technology. Unlike parchment and vellum, it's cheap and it's easy to mass produce. And when the Arabs come to Spain, they start to open paper-making factories. Paper allows you to do three things very effectively. You can gather information, you can analyse and develop ideas in a very precise way, and then you can disseminate your newfound knowledge to a wider world. And in the 10th century, that was a potent mix.
Cordoba's love of books became legendary. Whilst the Royal Library of France contained 900 books in this period, just one of Cordoba's 70 libraries amassed over 500,000. These books contain some of the most sophisticated studies of astronomy in the world.
In Northern Europe at this time there is nothing, but there is nothing that can be considered the result of sophisticated astronomy.
Why do you think Muslim scholars were particularly interested in the heavens and the revolution of the stars?
I think they were interested in science in general terms. For example, calculating the sacred direction. If you have to say your prayers, you must face towards Mecca. Calculating the direction of Mecca from a given place is not so easy. It is a complicated mathematical problem for which the Arabs had exact solutions from the 9th century.
One of the ways in which the Muslims solved these problems was by developing a Greek instrument called the astrolabe. This is a calculator for telling the time of night or day. If it's lined up on a star above the horizon, the angle can be registered with a movable needle. The measurement is then transferred to the reverse side of the astrolabe, where a base plate represents the geographical location. And a star grid, like a map of the heavens, shows the position of the stars. By aligning the needle to the grid using the measurements, the time can be read off the face of the astrolabe, just like a clock. The astrolabe enabled nighttime navigation, which helped to advance sea travel, and this in turn set the stage for the coming era of worldwide exploration and discovery. Cordoban scientists were streets ahead of the rest of Europe, especially when it came to medicine.
This account comes from an Islamic physician who encountered a Christian doctor at work. They brought me a knight who had an abscess on his leg and a woman suffering from consumption. I made a plaster for the knight and the swelling opened and improved. For the woman, I prescribed a diet to revive her consumption. But then the Frankish doctor arrived and objected. "Bring me a strong knight with a well-sharpened battle axe," he said. The knight struck a blow, the marrow of the leg spurted out, and the wounded man died on the spot. As for the woman, their doctor affirmed the devil must have entered her head. Then he grasped a razor and cut an incision in the shape of a cross, exposing the bone of the skull and rubbing salt into the wound. The woman died in the instant. I returned home, having learnt much about the medicine of the Christians.
The hospitals of Cordoba were performing operations which wouldn't be seen in the rest of Europe for hundreds of years. The city's most famous surgeon was a man called Abu Qasis. He spent 40 years compiling a hugely influential medical compendium.
Chapter 30 dealt with surgery, and these are just some of the instruments that were illustrated in that chapter. This is a specialist device used by eye surgeons for the relief of hypertension. And these two over here were employed to perform successful tracheotomies. And in fact, the Abu Qasis method was still popular well into the 20th century.
As well as large scientific collections, more everyday documents have survived from Islamic Cordoba. These give a detailed insight to the society that was created here. What kinds of things are being recorded on these bits of paper?
In this document there was written everything, absolutely everything.
So does that mean that people in the lower classes of society could read?
Yes, there are poor people with a very good education. The education is a way to be a better Muslim. So being a better Muslim means that you know the Quran and you know everything of the law. The law is not a king law. It is the God law.
Divine law.
Divine law.
Have you got any physical examples of these
Yes,
documents?
I have one. Well, it is a contract about plowing the land. For 2 years, we have to plant it with wheat and food, and he gets from this proportion of the production. The Muslim give a new thing. The land is mine. I rent you the land, and you give me a part of the production. People are interested not in having hunting lands like a lord or squire in England. The landlord rent his land.
And it's empowering as well, because if you're the lowest rung of society and yet you have some rights to your own land and you can keep a lot of the produce.
Yes.